Hello and welcome to Property Question Time. I'm Shona Lindsay and I'm here in the studio with two resident property experts, and we are also joined by the joys of technology on video link with another. Let me introduce you to the lovely men that we have here today. So first of all, we have Simon Zutshi.
Hello.
Hi, how are you?
Good, thank you.
Simon is the founder of Property Investors Network. And we also have in the studio Stefano Lucatello.
Hello, Shona.
Hi. International property lawyer and senior partner of Cobalt Law International Lawyers.
That's me.
And via video link, hello, we have Tony Gimple, who is the founding director of Less Tax for Landlords. Hi, Tony.
Hi, good morning. Great to be here.
Hi, Simon. So we've got our first question for you, if that's all right.
Yeah.
So my wife wants to buy an apartment to rent out and have as a future investment. We're in North Manchester and prices aren't great. £130,000 will get a two-bedroom with a rental income of around £650 a calendar month. There is also a service charge for us to pay out of that. I'm thinking down the line of a multi-occupancy house. For example, there is a double-fronted end terrace near the Metro Link for £140,000, and that could be easily turned into a great four-bedroomed HMO with ensuite in each room and a shared kitchen. We'd be looking at around £110 a week for each room, less council tax and bills. So the return would easily be more than 3 times than renting out an apartment. Am I missing something here? Is it supply and demand thing? Is it too much hassle to rent out an HMO, or what?
Okay, so there are lots of things there. First of all, I believe that buying a house and renting that out is better than buying an apartment. Mm-hmm. In London, it's a bit different, but in Manchester and most places around the country, personally, I believe you're going to get better capital growth from a house than you will an apartment. And also when you have apartments, you have things like service charges, which really eat into your monthly profit you're going to make. So in principle, I think he's thinking along the right lines. However, depending what you buy, depends on what the demand is in the local area. Houses of multiple occupation, HMOs that were mentioned, can be a great strategy to give you a much higher cash flow. Typically, you rent out 4, 5, 6 rooms in a property. The tenants come in, the rent they pay covers all the bills. So the landlord pays the bills, whereas in an apartment, the tenants would generally pay the bills. So there are a few differences to understand. But when you add it all up, you'll get probably much more monthly profit, cash flow, i.e. the money left over after all the expenses with an HMO than you would with a single let flat. But an HMO is going to be more work to manage. Mm-hmm. So again, into the decision, you've got to factor in, well, do you want to manage it yourself? How close is it to where you live? Or could you find a good letting agent to manage it for you? Likewise with an apartment, but there'll be a lot less toing and froing with tenants in an apartment. So these are things you need to bring into the conversation. You can find good letting agents who can manage HMOs. Most letting agents don't know how to do them,
right.
But there are some specialist HMO landlords now, but they will want, specialist HMO letting agents, but they'll want certain locations, certain specification in order to take that property onto their books to rent out. So always do your due diligence. Go on spareroom.co.uk and check out the area. That's the best website people use to advertise rooms that are available in HMOs, and also tenants go on there advertising saying they want rooms. So check out the demand on there, speak to local letting agents, work out who's going to live in your HMO. If you want students, it's got to be very, very close to university because proximity is very important, and they're generally quite lazy. They don't want to have to walk too far. They won't get on 2 buses to get to uni. It's got to be easy, but it might be young professionals. They mentioned the Metro Link, so if there's really good transport in city centre, that could be really good for people to get access to work. And then around the property, are there good facilities and amenities, such as supermarkets? Are there bars and restaurants? Young professionals want to be able to go to those in the evening. So check, is the location going to be right for the type of tenant you want to put in the property? But a very long answer there to the simple question. I would personally definitely look at HMOs if you understand the implications.
So with an HMO, if, for example, they were going to rent to students,
yes,
are there dark periods or are there periods of the year where it's less rent? How does that work?
So again, it really depends from location to location. So each university will have an accommodation office, and you can call them and get a really good understanding of how the student market works in that particular city. So where I have student property in Birmingham, we actually rent all year round. So typically The contracts will start beginning of July, run through to the end of June.
Yep.
The tenants, students sometimes don't move in until September. Sometimes they're there in the summer. So in some locations you might have a reduced rent in the summer. Some locations you only get 10 months rent. Now in some cities like Oxford and Cambridge that can work very well because the landlords might rent those out on short-term lets to tourists and holidaymakers who go to those locations. So again, it can work really well.
So perhaps somewhere like Manchester where there's a thriving cultural area there as well. I mean,
yes.
if they're going to be near to Salford as well, there's new theatres there, so perhaps you could go onto Theatre Diggs lists.
Absolutely,
perhaps in those. Those
so
dark
it's
periods.
about understanding what happens in the local market. The other thing just to be aware of with student HMOs, as we've kind of gone down that route, is there are lots of big purpose-built student blocks in many cities. And so the demand for typical houses, HMOs, has kind of gone down. And in many student areas, there are empty student HMOs, but they're generally the ones that are slightly further away from the university or the ones that aren't in such good condition. But if it is a good location, there's a possibility to actually acquire one of those, to renovate it to a good standard, and then you'll be able to rent it to students. But be aware of the academic year. If you get a house ready for students in August, think, well, I'm going to put them in September, most of the students moving in September have already sorted their contracts out at the beginning of the year, and you've probably missed the cycle. There will be some students looking in September, but less, and they'll go for the best property first. So you really got to understand the cycle if you're wanting to rent to students.
Wouldn't you register, Simon, with the universities and the
can
education
do.
institutions? I remember when I was a student, we used to go to the
go to the accommodation office,
absolutely, and they would tell you
and if you are, usually you have to be an accredited landlord, which is just a day course you can do. If you're accredited landlord, you can often get on their notice boards, and that's something you can definitely do as well. Or very often in most student areas, there are student specialist letting agents who can again help you fill those rooms.
You mentioned earlier about the specific letting agents. Would you expect a higher fee because there's potentially more work with an HMO? Would you be charged a higher fee?
Well, it's interesting that there is more work with an HMO. However, the fee you get charged by an agent is a percentage of the rental, and the rental is so much higher. So actually, most specialist letting agent will charge 10-12% plus VAT, which is similar to a normal letting agent. If an agent is saying, well, we're going to charge you 15% because there's so much more work, I would say they probably don't really realise it's going to be a lot more income, and I would steer it because you're paying too much for that. Some might even charge less. I've paid as low as 7 or 8% because they recognise it's a percentage of a much higher figure. Yeah.
Great, thank you very much. Good. So now, a question for Stefano. I am moving to France.
Lucky you.
I wish I was. This is the lovely person who's written in. They are moving to France, and they want to know something about the buying process. I've heard that there is a cooling off period for the buyer to pull out and a right of first refusal by the local authority, which means that they can buy the property I want at the same price as I have offered. How does this work?
Right. So in France, like any other country abroad, you would go to an estate agent, you pick the property, you would take it off the market by signing a reservation agreement and paying 5-10%, which would then be taken off the final completion monies. When you then have done all your due diligence, your research, all the searches that you need to do, you would sign the contract, the compromis de vente, which is the bilateral contract which the vendor and the purchaser sign. However, once you have signed that, what happens is, as a buyer, once you've signed it as the vendor, the contract will be sent to you as the buyer, and you would then have 10 clear days from the day after you receive the contract in the post to say, yes, I want to pull out. So it's a cooling off period in as much as you are not bound by that contract until you sign it. Two implications here. If you sign it because you know you're going to sign it because you want to proceed with it, no problem, you are bound from that moment. But if you leave it and you don't sign it and you don't return it signed within that 10-day period, you are out of that contract. So whether you know that you voluntarily don't want to sign it or whether you've forgotten to sign it within the 10-day period, you can be bound by that. So you've got to be very careful. So you've got to do something either to stay in it or to get out of it. By not doing anything, you will be bound to stay in that contract. You'll be bound. It's as if you had not taken any notice of it, and you will be bound by it. So
This is the seller.
No, this is
the buyer.
This is the buyer. So when you receive the contract from the seller, you will have 10 clear days starting from the day after you received it to sign it and return it, or if you don't do anything, you will be bound at the end of that 10-day period.
Right.
So you should only sign it if you want to proceed. But if you don't want to proceed, then you should return the contract within that 10-day period to the vendor, saying, with a recorded letter, I do not wish to proceed for whatever reason, and you can then have your deposit back if you've paid one, or your reservation fee back. So that's the first point. The second point is that once you have signed the contract, and once the vendor has signed the contract, it's not just green light and off we go. What happens is that contract needs to be sent to the notaire, the local notaire who's dealing with the sale, and he sends that contract to the local authority in the area, which has a right of first refusal. Every property in France is subject to this.
Wow.
So it's usually for architectural, historical, or natural beauty reasons. So there may be something of value nearby, and they may say that they want to buy it. And what happens is that you have to give the local authority a right of first refusal, which can be up to 3 months, dependent. In the south of France, for example, in Nice, in that sort of area, Cannes, Mougins, that sort of area, it takes up to 3 months, and you cannot do anything. So you cannot move forward, you can't complete, you can't do anything until the local authority comes back to the notaire and says, yes, we don't have an interest in the property, we have no interest in buying it, you can go ahead with the transaction. He will then receive a certificate of conformity, and he can move on to the next stage, which is he'll agree for the vendor and the purchaser to attend his offices at some point in the future, and if they're getting a mortgage, the bank representative as well will come to the notaire's office, and they will sign the documentation and complete the transaction in front of the notaire. But beware, you cannot be rushed into completing a transaction until the notaire has confirmed that he has received the reply back from the local authority saying, yes, you can proceed because we have no interest in or to buy this property.
So the buyer can't push you,
Nope.
say, why are you taking
Nope,
so long?
absolutely
Because this
not.
is a legal thing.
No.
It's quite a hairy time for both parties then, isn't
Well,
it?
it usually, it only, as I said, Sian, it only comes into force when there is a building of outstanding beauty, something of historical nature, something of artistic value that the country doesn't want to go out of its possession to a Russian or some foreigner basically who buys the property. That's the reason behind it. It very rarely gets exercised, but it is part of the procedure that you must know about. You can't do like in England, we exchange contracts and you could complete the next day.
Yeah,
you can't
that's
do that.
not going to happen.
No, you can't do that. And then, of course, as I say, you attend the notaire's office, you do the signing, and then the property is yours, and that's it, basically.
And so now, by the wonders of technology, we've got a question for you, Tony. So I am thinking about remortgaging my main property to pay cash for a buy-to-let property. Am I allowed to put the new property in my children's names? They are 7, 5 and 3, and use their annual tax-free income allowance. And where would I stand with capital gains tax?
Well, minor children, those under the age of 18, can't give a receipt, that's the technical term, so you can't put the property in their names. The bigger question is, why are you looking to buy a rental property? Are you going to be an accidental landlord, in which case it may not be the right thing for you, or are you looking to build a long-term professional property business? In any event, putting property in children's names can be problematical. You're making yourself susceptible to accidents in their life, their lifestyle, who they marry, their business interests, whether they get the sack or not. But in any event, you shouldn't let the tax towel wag the planning dog. Look at this as a business first and seek professional advice.
Thanks very much, Tony. That's really helpful. Right, we're heading into a break, but we'll be back really soon with some more questions for our resident experts to answer. Welcome back to Property Question Time. I'm Shona Lindsay and I'm joined here in the studio by Simon Zutshi, Stefano Lucatello, and via video link, Tony Gimple. So I'm going to go straight to you, Simon, with a question, if I may.
Yep.
Our landlord has expressed a desire to sell the house that we're in. He's had an estate agent come round to value the house with our cooperation, but we don't know the value. We love the house and we'd like to buy it. The landlord has asked us to make an offer. Even though we're not the owners, can we ask the estate agents to visit the property for evaluation?
Okay, so I would suggest that it makes perfect sense for the landlord to sell to the tenants if the tenants want to live there, because they don't have to actually pay an estate agent. And as long as they can agree on a price, which might be the only sticking point, that can be a really good strategy. And in fact, there are certain mortgage products out there at the time of filming where the landlord can actually help the tenant with part of the deposit, a part gifted deposit. There are only a couple of lenders that will do it, but that might make it easier for those tenants to actually buy the property. And I think that's actually quite nice. If someone's lived in your property for a number of years and you give them first refusal, I think that's a good thing to do as a landlord, if you come to the decision that really you need to sell that property for whatever reason. So it might be that the landlord is just chances his luck, seeing what they're prepared to offer for it. But I would throw it back to him and say, well, what do you want for it? Now, they could probably ask an estate agent to come round and value the property, saying they're thinking about selling. And probably on that initial first viewing, the agents probably wouldn't know that they didn't actually own the property. Now, if they took the property on, they'd obviously need all the identification proofs to stop people selling properties they don't own. But on that initial viewing, there may be no issue, and they can get a good idea of the ballpark figure for that property. Or they could go on to Rightmove or Zoopla, look for a similar style property in that area and see what other properties are being sold for. Now, take into account that property prices will vary depending on the condition. Some might have an extension, a conservatory or not. So they've got to compare like with like, but that would be a really good idea to get a view there. And, I would speak to the landlord, because if they can come up with a price that works well, they can say to the landlord, well, look, we're not going to pull out. If you've got someone else to buy, you've got to pay an agent, and 1 in 3 sales fall through for whatever reason, whereas we want to stay here, we don't have to move, so we're really incentivized to buy this property. So let's see if we can sit down and sort something out between us.
And also the rent is going to continue up until the date of purchase.
Absolutely. Whereas
so
what happens is, when a landlord says, right, I'm going to sell the property, sometimes tenants get spooked and decide to give the notice and move out. And there might be months and months when the property's empty and he's getting no rental income, and also, he's got to pay the insurance and the bills, and an empty property is not a good thing to have, more chance of being broken into and vandalised, whatever. So actually, it really is in the incentive of the landlords to stop messing around and actually work with the tenants and see if there's a mutual win-win for everyone.
Brilliant. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
So, Stefano, a question for you. I am buying a property in Spain with my wife. I've been sent the contract to sign, but the agent says I must attend in Spain to sign it and go through it with her. I can't get any time off work at the moment, so is there another way of dealing with this without me being there in person? Do I need to get a UK lawyer's advice before I sign it?
The starting point with anything, as it is in England, anywhere else, is due diligence. You've got to do your due diligence. Don't sign anything until you've done the due diligence. As I've said before, when you buy a property, only sign a reservation agreement. Make sure that the reservation agreement has a clause in it that says that within 7 or 21 days, between 7 and 21 days, if you decide against it, you can get your money back. If it's not in there, get them to put a clause in. If it's not something they want to put in, the estate agent, then walk away and go somewhere else. There are millions of properties for sale. It's a buyer's market, not a seller's market. That's the first point. The second point is that, presuming she's done, or they have done their research and they're now ready to sign the contract, they don't have to be in Spain to sign the contract. I don't see why the contract can't just be emailed to them and they could sign it. Now, if for some reason they have to go back at the time, and I can't think of one, to go back to Spain to sign the contract in front of the estate agent, and there isn't, I think, any good reason that that should be the case, but let's say that they have to, they should do, and one of them can't attend. Let's say that wife can't attend because of her job, but husband can. She could write a power of attorney to her husband, in favour of her husband, in English and in Spanish in this case. She would go, we would draft that. I mean, we quite often do that. We could draft it in English and in Spanish. She would then attend in front of a notary public in the United Kingdom. She would sign the document in front of him or her. The notary public would then legalise and notarise the document, send it to what's called the Foreign and Commonwealth Office for the apostille to be put on it. The apostille is a certificate in English and in French, which is put on the back of the document that needs to be recognised abroad, which otherwise wouldn't be recognised because it's been signed in absentia of the local lawyer who doesn't know whether the signature is real or not. But anyway, they would sign it. It would have the Hague apostille put on the back of it, and then it would be sent, in this case, to the notary in Spain, who would have to, or the estate agent, who would have to take notice and recognise the document as if it had been signed in front of them at some time in the past. This is all to do with something called the Hague Convention of 1961, and there are 148 countries that have signed to this, and if they are member states that have signed, then this procedure must be followed. The notarisation costs about £100. The preparation of the power of attorney is about £350, and the apostille fee is £75, a fixed fee that is payable to the Foreign and Commonwealth Office. You can either have a day service if you need it urgently, or you can have a 3 to 4 day service if you don't need it urgently and the fee is less. So that is what he or she must do. That's the only thing I can think of. What else was there, Shona?
Well, having a UK lawyer, but also the fact that they want them to be there in person to
Yes,
attend
I can't
in Spain.
think, as I say, I can't think of any reason why you should have to be there in person to sign the contract. As regards to a UK lawyer, yes, I mean, that's what I do. We advise, as specialist lawyers, we advise clients who buy property abroad. Now, you don't need me, but it's always better, I would say, to have a UK lawyer that speaks your language, that talks to you in language you understand, that writes to you in English, that is on your time scale. In our case, we are regulated by the Solicitors Regulation Authority, so we have £3 million worth of indemnity insurance. So if I commit an act of negligence, you can sue me for negligence. It's never happened in 32 years of being a solicitor. Touch wood, and it won't happen again. Oh, it won't happen at all. Sorry, Freudian slip there. And so those are the reasons for having a UK lawyer. Spanish lawyers are not obliged to have indemnity insurance more than a particular level. And if they do, it's very rare.
Right,
So-
okay. Thank you very much. I'm going to go with our last question of this episode to Tony now. Hi, Tony. So, Tony, can a landlord overcharge council tax to a tenant? The council tax is in the landlord's name and the tenant has been paying it directly to the landlord. Obviously, I told my friend that there is a freeze on the council tax this year and told him to query his rates at the council, which he did. Any advice, please?
There could be all sorts of reasons behind it. It doesn't smell right to me. You know, they're clearly up to something they don't want to disclose. It could be they're trying to avoid licensing. Gut feeling is don't do it though. You know, the last thing you want to do is end up with problems which could rebound in your work life or when you come to move on to another property. It's a bit of a warning sign.
Thank you. Thanks, Tony. Well, that's all we've got time for today, but please, please, please get in touch. Do email us on info@propertytelevision.tv or get in touch via the website, which is www.property-tv.co.uk. Thank you so much to Simon Zutshi,
Thank you.
to Stefano Lucatello,
Thank you.
and to Tony Gimple. Thank you for being with us today, and we'll see you soon. Bye.